All right. Well, welcome everyone. So good to see you. Thanks very much for joining. To our colleagues from really all over the world. Today we are a truly international group, and you know, it's just good to be with everyone. As I think many folks know, our wonderful co-founder Peter Gable and leader passed away recently, and this is our first call, a real substantive call since Peter's passing. So just and Peter had made connection with Amy, and that was really what launched this endeavor. So just want to dedicate this call to him and his memory for those of you who knew him. So usually we kick off the call with a little bit of a go round to connect with each other and have people go around and say where you are physically, you know, just what city or just where you are, and just where you are in time and space at this moment. Just a quick intro just to situate ourselves together and feel a sense of community. And then after we do that, we will turn it over to Amy and Bronwen and Amelia to present to us. And then we'll have some time for dialogue. We are recording it, and we have a very large community that we send it out to. So even though our numbers are a little bit few today, this will go out to many. So that's just something wanted to alert. So I will start just to kick us off. I'm Nanette Shore. I live in New York City. I'm sitting right now in my office in the Bronx. Sorry, Perry was just saying he couldn't find the link. I'm sitting right now in my office in the Bronx, in the South Bronx, where I work. I have a really nice view out the window of the George Washington Bridge, and here I am. So over to Amy.
Oh, hi everyone. I'm Amy Cohen. I am based now in Philadelphia, but currently sitting in my sister's office in Boston, where I'll be for the holidays, and sort of just very grateful to be with family right now. Do I pass it on to someone?
Sorry, I'm muted, Amy. No, that's okay. I'll pass it. Debbie, would you like to introduce next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Debbie Knoll. I use she, her pronouns, and I am in Chicago. I'm in my office in a little huddle room because we have an open office plan, which is really horrible. But generally, I'm great. I'm very happy to be here. I'm excited about the topic, and also like this is my first meeting. I've been getting the emails for a long time, and I've actually gone to like a law jam because of an email I received from you all, but I've never made a meeting. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Welcome. I'm just going to go in the view in my Zoom. So next is Bronwen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bronwen, and I am sitting in my office, home office, which I was incredibly grateful to acquire just before pandemic. The first time in my life. I've been on dining room tables before that. So, and it's in Sydney, in Australia, near the coast, and it's an absolutely gorgeous day. And yeah, very interested to meet you all. We have very little sense of what you all do. If it's possible for a 2-minute context, it would be nice. So I don't know whether this is. I mean, I've looked at the website, but I didn't look. Yeah, anyway, nice to meet you all.
Sure, Bronwen, we will welcome, and we'll say a couple of words after we go around to orient you, for sure. Perry, we've just been joined by Perry Sedman. Perry, shall I continue, or did you want to pick up here?
I think you should go on because I'm not sure where we are.
Okay, good point. So next is Amelia.
Hi, Nanette. Oh, sorry, I have a slight echo. So as you can perhaps see, I'm in Bronwen's office right now. So I've been working, Bronwen and I work together in Sydney, but I've been working remotely with COVID and just flew into Sydney last night. So it's very lovely to be spending time with Bronwen and lovely to be with all of you.
Welcome, Amelia. Libby.
Hi, I just had the pleasure of meeting Peter on Zoom a few months ago and went out and bought his book. I'm so inspired by his perspective. I'm a friend of Kim Wright's, and that's how I learned of this group. And I have kind of an ongoing fascination with the possibilities of a new constitution for the country. And I'm just so proud of the lawyers who have created this concept of prefigurative legality. I'm just amazed and very eager to learn.
Thank you, Libby, and welcome. Next on my list is Duncan.
So I am in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I just came in from a lovely walk out in the woods, and it is a gloriously beautiful day. So I'm pleased to be among you guys. I have missed a number of the PISLAP meetings, but I also really miss Peter. Just such an important guy. And I regret that I hadn't had the opportunity to spend more time with him just personally. So I'm glad this is being dedicated to his memory.
Thank you, Duncan. Much appreciated. Elaine, you're next.
Hi everyone, really nice to be here. I'm in Ireland right now and it is just after 7:30 p.m. So it's evening, it's dark, it's been dark for a few hours. And yeah, also really nice to be here and also very much missing seeing Peter's face. But yeah, it's lovely to be here in community with you all and also very curious about this topic. I was reading the introduction to it today and yeah, sounds fascinating. So very much looking forward to hearing.
Thank you, Elaine. Welcome. Bonnie, you're next.
Thank you. My name is Bonnie Silvestri. I work in Sarasota County for the local government here. And so I am enjoying sort of a fall kind of day for Florida and am currently in my office. So I'm probably going to be a little quieter than normal. And I'm very interested to hear this topic, particularly having worked almost exclusively in government and in local government currently. So thank you.
Bonnie. Diane? You're next.
Thank you, Nanette. I'm sitting at home in New York City. I'm someone who has been a trial lawyer for 35 years and now retiring and was happy to spend time with PISLAP. I had a tremendous appreciation for Peter's work and continue to want to bring that work out to lawyers, law professors, law students, and everyone who is affected by the justice system. And I think I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thanks, Diane. Welcome. And Diane and Bonnie are members of our executive committee, as is Jennifer. Perry? And who's Perry?
Yeah, Perry Sedman. I'm also a member of the executive committee of PISLAP, and I've been with PISLAP since kind of the beginning, meeting Peter in 1996 at Michael Lerner's conference in Washington, D.C. I'm sitting in my living room in my townhouse in Washington, D.C., although I'm officially a Florida resident and have a place in Miami Beach. And I have a psychiatrist visiting me, asking me why I'm up here in the cold weather when in Miami it's 80 degrees and sunny. So I'm interested in the outcome of that analysis.
Very. Kim Vanderheiden, great to see you.
Hello, I haven't been here in a while. I've been swamped, but also it seemed like a really important one to come to. I am not directly connected with law. I'm an artist, and I do artwork on justice and looking at justice differently. I'm also a restorative justice advocate, and I do a lot of community organizing. And I'm interested in this topic also because it seems to me to dovetail with things I need to know with community organizing or that might be useful. But also Peter's work always really sort of squared with what I was trying to do as an artist. And I've really valued and gotten confidence from hearing somebody with a law background write that, because I doubted myself as an artist and thought that I was too naive and didn't really know the practicalities of the situations that people need the legal system for. And then I came across Peter's work and he had it all spelled out. And I was like, okay, I'm going for this and doing this. And so his work has been extremely important to my work. And I've got books of his extra that I've ordered to like share with people. And I spread the word about Peter with with the things that I do.
Thank you, Kim. And Kim has done some beautiful design work for PISLAP in the past through her art, expressing what justice looks like. Jennifer, you're next.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Jones Benino, and I am based in Denver, Colorado. I am a civil rights lawyer, and I also help to direct an activist defense clinic here at a law school in Denver. I'm also part of the executive committee and really happy to learn about this concept today. Thank you.
Jennifer. Stu Webb.
Yes, Stu Webb. I'm a retired lawyer living in Minneapolis. It is nice and cold and fresh and good sunny today. Lovely winter here already. I was very involved with through the years with PISLAP and also with collaborative practice. And I began to sense that the prefiguring possibility is something that collaborative law does. So I'm interested in seeing how that fits in here. I'm very excited about the program, and I love being with PISLAP folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Stu. And Stu, is being modest, he's actually the founder of collaborative divorce and collaborative practice. Brad?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone. I do miss Peter saying everyone's name with such positivity and a welcoming presence. So yeah, so I'm based in New York City, and I teach a course called Mediation and Meditation at a university in a college in New York City. And I also involved in mediation. And I am in Scottsdale, Arizona right now, looking out at the desert. Very different than the New York City landscape, typically with saguaros and all kinds of thorny objects. But it's a beautiful sunny day, and I'm very glad to be here.
Brad, enjoy your time in Arizona. And last but not least, Julie Oxenberg just joined us. Julie, do you just want to introduce yourself and where you're situated in time and space at the moment?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry I'm not on video right now, maybe later, but I am Julie Oxenberg. I'm a psychologist and have been extremely inspired by and interested in Peter Gable's work, and really interested to learn more about how PISLAP has been integrating that work. I live in north of Boston in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I'm just very glad to be here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. I saw Duncan's ears perk up because he's from Gloucester also. All right, everyone. Well, thank you again and welcome. I know we took a little longer with introductions than usual. So now, without too much introduction, I just want to turn it over to Amy, Amelia, and Bronwen, who will talk with us about prefigurative legality. I know that Bronwen had asked just for a little bit about PISLAP and just to contextualize her presentation. So maybe just as a very, very brief orientation, we are a movement to seek to transform the legal culture, the legal system, legal practice in directions that emphasize love, healing, and justice. So we've pushed for reforms within the current legal system, but also, as in prefigurative legality, we try to seed a future system that will embody our highest visions and aspirations. And we've been in existence since 1996. So we have a long history. We've had many, many talks, presentations, conferences, and our movement has grown, and we have, as you can see, folks from all over the world. So with that, I'll pass it over to Amy, Amelia, and Bronwen.
All right, great. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Nanette and Perry and everyone for having us. I'll just start by saying this meeting is very bittersweet for me. I've never met Peter, but have been long inspired by his work. And towards the beginning of the pandemic, I just thought, I should write to him. I should send him some work. And he was such a generous email interlocutor. And we had planned to connect, at least virtually, for the first time at this meeting. So I'm grateful to be with his community and kind of honor his spirit. So thank you all. Thank you all for having us. So the paper that we circulated asks whether it makes sense to prefigure forms of legality, which is potentially a paradoxical question. So in social movement practice, the term prefiguration often has anarchist roots. People describe prefiguration as kind of being the change you want to see and implementing the world we wished we had, in the here and now, in the means of struggle. So for this reason, prefiguration often involves people trying to build autonomous forms of life outside of state institutions, outside of capitalist institutions. For us then to speak of prefigurative legality or prefigurative law might therefore seem paradoxical or surprising. Our paper, however, observes people doing things in the world that we think are well described by this paradoxical term. And these are people who essentially are playing with law, working within legal rules to transform them. Now, these people don't necessarily oppose or defy law, nor do they necessarily advocate for law reform. Rather, they kind of use legal techniques to translate criticisms of the status quo into new rules and practices that act as if alternative worldviews have already been enacted. So we think this kind of playing with law is a form of prefiguration worth our collective energy to theorize and help grow. We also think it's an approach to critique and reconstruction that flows kind of almost naturally from Peter's interpretation of the methods and aims of critical legal studies. So with that introduction, we're going to turn first to Amelia to illustrate some of the playing with law that inspired our paper. And then we're going to try and scaffold a set of practices and maybe even a field that we might call prefigurative legality.
Okay, thanks, Amy. So this image, has it got the whole, is that okay like that? Or do I try to get a better window? Yeah, okay, sorry everyone, I'm adjusting my technology in different circumstances than normal. So this image is the event that sparked Parking Day, which is the empirical focus of my book. As the name suggests, it's a playful occupation of public space. It's also connected, though, to a long line of very serious activism about urban space, and particularly the urgent need to reduce the amount of that space devoted to private cars. That activism has been successful in many ways and has seen significant shifts in policy. Progress in implementation, though, has been slow. Cars still tend to dominate on the ground. Instead of asking for change, Parking Day takes a different approach. Parking Day uses a creative interpretation of the law to act as if things are already otherwise. The idea is that paying a parking meter creates a lease, a property right that need not be used only for storing a car. The first installation was in San Francisco in 2005. Helped by its connection to the burgeoning tech community, it became an annual event the following year. By 2011, there were around 1,000 parks in more than 35 countries. This image here is from Montreal in 2015. When I was there that year, there were around 200 parking spaces turned into parks. The idea that paying a meter creates a lease is not accurate. Rules, of course, vary from city to city, but generally they say that if you pay the meter and park your car, you won't be given a parking ticket. So legally it's a license, not a lease. Rules about setting up a picnic or an art installation, or as in this image, a free health clinic for undocumented migrants are much less clear. There are lots of rules that officials could use to force people to pack away if they wanted to. Planning, traffic, disability access, food service, public assemblies. And these many different laws overlap, and often they're contradictory. So with this overlap and contradiction comes openness and possibility. The laws regulating public space tend to be highly discretionary. There are invariably multiple factors for decision makers to weigh against each other. They're also changed quite frequently, but not always well publicised or well understood. So that means there's a lot of scope for creating or reshaping legality. So the kinds of practices described by legal scholars like Lon Fuller, Hendrik Hartog, and Robert Cover, but also for more activist performances of law as if it were otherwise. So for my book, I interviewed people involved in Parking Day in San Francisco, where it started, in Sydney, where it moved relatively early, and in Montreal, where it arrived relatively late. I also looked at media and social media reporting on the event, and I found significant differences in the stories that people tell to different audiences. So in the media and in their interactions with officials, participants very confidently proclaim the legal basis for their actions, as if the use of parking spaces for other purposes is well established. In interviews, there was much more reflection on the radical nature of the event, the degree to which they were pushing boundaries. On the ground, Parking Day generally takes place without engaging police or other officials. People like seeing road space turned into play space. The joy that people get out of reclaiming streets is generally shared by people who see them. You can see the ticket inspector smiling in this photo. In a few cases, though, things don't go smoothly. The woman in this photo was asked by police to pack up her park and move along. As you can see, I hope from this image, the policeman was quite receptive to her story about the legality of the event, even though it was at odds with decades of norms and practices. The police took action, though, because a local resident complained. And I think this case exemplifies the way in which legality is socially and collectively constructed. It's not just police who need to be persuaded for a prefigurative performance to stick. As I said, the vast majority of parks are not just tolerated, but celebrated. The event has also prompted wider changes. It's held up as an example of bottom-up placemaking. Parking Day prompted the city of San Francisco to create new permitting processes for parklets, and those have also spread worldwide. It can also be connected to a range of other shifts, including pop-ups like this one, which became so prominent during COVID. So there is much in Parking Day to suggest that acting as if can be productive. Thanks.
So building from Parking Day, we tried to sketch 4 characteristics of prefigurative legality to try and bring more consciousness to what we see as a distinctive legal practice. And I'm just going to sketch these characteristics for you, and we'd be eager to hear what you think. So the first characteristic is pluralism. So as we saw with Amelia's interlocutors, people may exploit the fact that what sounds like an unambiguous or official meaning of a legal term, like a lease, has different practices responsive to this term. Now, of course, the idea that law is what people do with it on the ground is just a basic realist and critical and socio-legal insight. But it's how people use this sense of possibility or indeterminacy to enact desired futures in the present that prompts us to describe their interventions as examples of prefigurative legality. We're calling this second characteristic acting as if. And here we want to capture some of the feeling of liberating oneself from the constraints of false necessity, to invoke Roberto Unger. When people use law in ways that defy any likely official authorization, they're acting as legal subjects oriented not towards making demands on the state, but proceeding as if they already have legal power. In his comments on a draft of our paper, Peter reminded us of Paul Harris's defense of the radical health worker, Stephanie Klein. And I'm just going to quote from his email to me, quote, "Klein was not allowed to sit next to Paul in a hearing, so he crossed without permission between the judge and the prosecutor to stand next to her in Oakland's prisoner dock, which was a beautiful example of prefigurative trial practice," end quote. In our paper, the Pay the Rent movement and the Aboriginal Tent Embassy in Australia are other kinds of evocative examples. The third characteristic describes how people may act notwithstanding what might be a deep loss of faith in law and law reform to secure progressive effects, at least in the short term. So for this reason, people may bring a playful sense of experimentation to temper some of their skepticism with hope that legality nevertheless remains a desirable pathway towards progressive social change. So they continue to draw on law's modes of legitimacy and status. Like Amelia's Parking Day interlocutors, people may engage in transgressive interpretations of law, but without seeking to break law or to fundamentally undermine its social authority as a governing principle, and yet at the same time without seeking or inviting permission from authoritative interpreters or official decision makers. Okay, now our final characteristic, so pluralism, acting as if, acting notwithstanding, we thought we needed something to talk about a kind of approach to goal orientation. And we called this final characteristic acting anyhow and in case. So it's a little tricky. People engaged in prefigurative legal experiments tend not to operate according to tight calculations between their interventions on the one hand and their desired law reform on the other. People refuse to engage in this familiar model of instrumental goal setting because they want to create alternatives in the here and now. So they want to dismantle clear distinctions between means and ends. And yet, such actors also often anticipate something more or something beyond what they can currently realize, to quote Davina Cooper. This something more tends to follow from the relationships and practices that people build in the present. So they labor together to create new possibilities and meanings from existing legal material, expecting that what happens next is unknown, not guaranteed, and perhaps even likely to be overtaken by events. Yet they act anyway in case the seeds they are planting will bear fruit of some sort in time.
Okay, so the last substantive bit of the paper, which I'll just briefly touch upon because we want to leave plenty of time for discussion, but we essentially illustrate how this works in a couple of different fields and also try to tie it to much broader sense of how this idea might resonate with broader interdisciplinary work in the academy. But the two areas that we illustrated in are actually really interesting. We can talk about it more in questions if people are interested. One is the writing of alternative judgments, which has become a very popular practice in academia. And it it is rather different to what Amelia talked about. Amelia's example is much more embedded in material reality. But in these alternative judgments, it started with feminist scholars who wanted to write as if the world had taken on board the insights of feminist activism. And if you were still a judge on the Supreme Court in Canada, where it first began, and they actually launched their collection with a performance, an artistic performance, which included a sort of operatic aria of woven together of these judgments. So there was an embedded material and playful sense to that. But this act of writing the judgment for famous cases as if another world already existed has just taken off, and there are now dozens of books which we cite in the article in all sorts of different traditions of activism, carrying this forward, with the most challenging and interesting, I think, in some ways, being Indigenous peoples who sometimes have almost fallen silent in the face of the impossibility of writing. This one person wrote a poem, created a poem, and I'm thinking of Kim's words about her artistic practice here, from broken fragments of the original judgment, which she just couldn't find new words to re-articulate a new world. But others found ways to do it. So, and then we also looked at people's tribunals, where people just form, and I'm sure many of you might know the history of that, starting from Bertrand Russell in the 60s in the response to the Vietnam War. But again, that's a tradition where people have formed their own tribunals in the international law, peace and justice space often, but increasingly in relation to sort of anxieties about our incapacity to take account of the non-human world and nature. And so alternative people's tribunals speaking for nature and on behalf of rivers and mountains, particularly in Australia, are taking off. So these are other practices of prefigurative legality, which we explore in the paper. And then we have a very sort of theoretical section, but we wanted to highlight the connection that we made specifically to Peter Gabel's work here. And I wanted to just echo Amy, and I never met or communicated with Peter at all, but I read him in graduate school. And I just remember feeling he had I actually at that stage of my life couldn't connect with it because it was so different from all the other critical legal studies that I read, but it seemed to have something that always haunted me a bit. And then coming back to that work for this paper, we found that it was so apposite, and that his work spoke much more directly to this potential for prefigurative legality than much of the other more straight sort of critical legal studies work, and particularly his sense of the undoing of what he called the pact of withdrawn selves. And we talk a little bit about how his work and then other work like critical race scholars such as Patricia Williams grapple with the sort of the limits and constraints of using the master's tools to reshape the master's house, which is not his phrase, but a famous, it's Audre Lorde, I think. But the importance of doing that, I think both Patricia Williams and Peter Gabel have been more eloquent than most legal scholars I've ever written about hanging on to the possibilities inherent in that. But we are aware also of some of the constraints and criticisms that people bring to that enterprise, and that's what Amelia is going to almost close with. Amy will close.
So, like Parking Day, prefigurative legality is open to critique. Activists and scholars pursuing more structural reform might dismiss these experimental performances as too fleeting, lacking the force necessary to make a real difference. So, Amy, is there a problem?
Amelia, it's a little bit of echo, and I don't know if it's possible to.
Maybe if.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. We've got a complex muting system here.
Just want to make sure people hear you, and myself too.
Is that okay now? Is that working now? Yeah, there's many different buttons.
Thank you.
To,
much
and
better.
neither of us,
Thank you.
It's not our strong point anyway. So yes, activists might dismiss these experimental performances as too fleeting, lacking the force necessary to make a real difference. And yet there are strong arguments that Parking Day did catalyse, or at least help to catalyse, longer-term change, and the COVID-induced pop-up boom suggests its effects are far from finished. Or critics might highlight the potential for state law to simply repress efforts to enact alternative futures, especially efforts by vulnerable and marginalised groups. Others may observe the ontological limits of imagining another world by working from within the taken-for-granted material of those masters' tools, for example, by paying a parking meter to decommodify public space. But the nature of those tools is not static, and performances can perhaps blunt or redirect them. So far from entrenching the commodification of public space, Parking Day at its best emphasises the communal and socially constructed nature of property.
We feel compelled finally to add that critics might also rightly note that the energy of as if is politically indeterminate. So when Bronwen and I wrote the paper, we just felt haunted by this sense that we were living in a moment when millions of Americans appeared willing to live as if an election was stolen, enacting a kind of wish fulfillment of a highly substantive and specific vision. So we've just tried to describe an approach to prefigurative legality that's marked by left commitments to pro-egalitarianism and anti-authoritarianism and a kind of an ethos of open-ended experimentation. But we also think there are pressing questions to ask about why and how prefiguration today animates the political right. So we'll just conclude by saying that as analysts, we too are acting anyhow and in case. We offered the essay to try and create a space for identification, to quote Gibson Graham, among left scholars and organizers. Amelia showed how ordinary people use common understandings of property to bring new understandings into being. And we just thought this was such a significant achievement. I highly recommend the book. But it's an achievement not only kind of in city building, but also in socio-legal scholarship. It kind of rests on a form of scholarship that's just willing to suspend skepticism about how a series of tiny temporary interventions that play with law might coalesce into structural change. So we offered the term prefigurative legality as if this is already a field of scholarship and praxis that will continue to expand, prefiguring our hope in so doing. So thank you all again for having us.
What a wonderful ending. I like that very much, how these tiny temporary interventions can actually lead to the change, but the term being the aspiration, expressing the aspiration and the aspiration as reality. Wonderful. Thank you all. So I'd like to open, and welcome to Lyle, who just joined us. So I'd like to open it up to questions, comments, dialogue for our three presenters.
This is Lyle. I'm just apologies for joining, but I've caught intermittent pieces of this. Is the recording going to be available later?
Yes, it will, Lyle.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. I could probably kick it off. I had a question that was, oh, Bonnie, did you want to jump in there?
You can ask go ahead with your question.
It's actually Anita's question, so I'll let you go first, and then we can circle back to it.
Well, I love the fact that you spoke about imagining that an election had been stolen, which was just so brilliant. I'm so glad you brought it back to kind of something that we're grappling with in the moment. I sort of was thinking about, because in our community, for example, and sort of because we lacked a mask mandate and a number of other things, there was, because we live in Florida, a lot of movement during COVID to have people dining outdoors, but then there's sort of like a pulling back from that, as if the COVID is now over. But I really delighted in the fact that we were able to use public spaces in a new way. And so I wanted to mention that. And then I also was thinking about, and I don't know how common it is in other places, but we have, I think it's pedestrian zero, something zero, because there are a lot of accidents. And I've noticed on the roads a number of shrines that are put up in areas where someone has been killed. And I feel that that's also a comment in a public space on the safety of that area. So I thought maybe you could speak to that as well, because I think it's kind of in line with what you spoke about.
I feel like, Amelia, do you wanna take that one?
Sorry, we were just wondering if we wait for questions or yeah, Amelia's happy to.
Yes, thank you. So Vision Zero is something I'm working on in more recent research. Actually, I'm looking at, those memorials are really very sad and interesting. I guess they're kind of different in that they're, I think, more of a critique of the current system rather than, I guess they're trying to catalyze action, but it's unclear what the action is from those memorials. So I think Parking Day was what I found really interesting, and I guess the background to it was I had also worked in planning and found public participation was very negative. It tended to be asking people what they didn't like. And what I really liked about Parking Day was that it wasn't saying, no, I don't want affordable housing near me. It was saying, this is what I do want near me. And so in terms of the Vision Zero, that program you raised, I have been more recently speaking to activists who have been going out and building their own infrastructure. So building bike lanes, building pedestrian crossings. So again, that rather than just saying there's a problem with people being killed on roads, actually going forward and starting to propose how we might address that.
Thank you.
Julie, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And thanks for your courage to do something, out of the conventional frame. And I do think, as a psychologist, but just as a person, I think, it seems like this has this potential to engage people on other levels and other, aspects of their being emotionally and otherwise, when they can see something showing up differently and for different reason and from different energy. And I'm just wondering, and maybe helps people get out of just their head and the standard kind of, reified way of just seeing reality as fixed. And I don't know, I was just wondering if you could speak to any of the kind of emotional or sort of social psychological impact of this for you or for the people involved, anything you noticed?
I might start. I'm sure we might all have some thoughts. That's really generative, and certainly for me, this general line of working is. I mean, it sounds a bit excessive, but I feel like it's almost a savior. It's like at a particular point of both a career and watching the world move in a certain direction. I just felt it's a really fundamental energizing of the purpose of working in and through law. But it wouldn't just apply to law, but I think in relation to law, I have found it that non-rational connection and also the sense of, so the embodied possibilities that it presents, it's almost quite literally helped to continue getting up in the morning, if that makes sense.
Wow.
And I also think it was connected for me to sort of a growing sense of the need for that after I had children, which is absolutely not like it just happened for me to be the thing that shocked me out of my head most. Like there's lots of other ways of being shocked out of your head, but I was very head-based, and to have children sort of alerted me to other possibilities, and then to go back into work. Yeah, that's a very broad response to that. But two other quick things. One is yesterday we presented this to an audience that wanted very strongly to remind us of the importance of remembering that law in particular is a form of violence and uses physical force. So there's an embodied and material and non-rational aspect that's very dark that law is actually deeply implicated in, and that the paper sort of was resolutely not engaging with that, which is true. And we haven't yet sort of really thought through the implications of that. So, and that connects to my other point, which is that Julie's words began by saying courage. And one of the things that, I mean, it's nice to feel I was courageous. I felt like it was more like survival rather than courage to go in this direction. But there is an element of losing professional credibility, and the writing judgments part particularly engages that. And so people, there are people who just are derisive of particularly the more creative and artistic ways of rewriting judgments. And I think there's an absolutely, I mean, I've been talking to Amy for years about doing a project on this, and one day I will, but it's sort of the mix of ethical and professional credibility challenges in doing this kind of work to your status as a professional that's accepted in a community, and the ways, and there's a nice phrase called positive mavericks, which sort of emerged in the context of people working on sustainability who wanted to push the envelope in their work, and particularly in the finance world, which is very conservative on what counts as exciting. And so these professionals coined this term that in the professional world, to characterize yourself as a positive maverick is a sort of, it jibes with the prefigurative possibilities that Julie's question raised for me. I don't know if Amy and Amelia want to add to it.
Yes, I could. I'd like to say something. I was thinking as we, in the prefiguring, that one of the things that's happened in collaborative law is you shifted from a focus on the law and to focus on the relationship of the parties. Because when you don't have to go to court and you don't have to prepare, only focusing on the law, the people who do collaborative work are working with the relationship of them with the parties, and you can now decide things to do things that aren't just what the law says. You start looking at the relationship of the parties, and as they raise up more in their consciousness, get more used to just being able to communicate, you allow much more of the relationship rather than a zealous advocate. And so the proof of the pudding is that on relationships is that 80 to 90% of the collaborative lawyers are women, because they are more related to relationships. And men are more caught up with their testosterone and get more into being right and focusing on that, on the relation. So that relaxing and allowing people to just be themselves in a relationship is what dissolves the conflict. So basically, I hate to overstate it, but it's love does dissolve conflict. And the relationship of the people who do the collaborative work with the parties who are in conflict, they are, in a sense, transmitting a higher relationship to the conflicted party. And this is the prefiguration that allows, number one, the lawyers to be more loose and not just looking at the law, but what can help these people resolve this conflict in their family. And the other side of the prefigure is that the clients begin to see that it's up to them to do it and not to be using a lawyer as a midwife. So that's basically what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Stu. Didn't know if any of our presenters had a comment. Okay, we'll continue then. So collaboration is prefiguration. Duncan, I believe you're next.
Yeah, I I am fascinated and a little daunted by the implications of what folks are saying here today about law being able to imagine a possible future, and to use the law as a way to be able to get to that possible future, because the law typically doesn't do that. The law reifies what is present and doesn't imagine what might be true. So I really want to spend more time thinking about this. I regret I haven't read the paper, but I pulled it up as you guys were talking, so I will read it as soon as we're done. The connection I wanted to make here is with, I'm a psychotherapist as well as a recovering lawyer. And one of the things I try to do sometimes when folks are stuck is to use something that Alfred Adler called the miracle question. which is if you didn't have this problem that you're bringing here today, what would your life be like? And it's a prefigurative, imaginal exercise, right? What is it that you're trying to create here rather than what is it that you're responding to? So I really hear that in the work that you're doing, that you're recommending that we as lawyers and as well as just citizens spend some time imagining what might be. And I'm just wondering if I'm on the right track here with what it is you're trying to do, and just any responses to that idea of what it is that we value, what are we looking for, what are we trying to create?
I like it.
So from the panelists, am I tracking okay? Because I feel like I'm.
I don't want to over like I don't know if Amy or Amelia want to. I'm happy to, because that, well, just very briefly, that resonates with me with what's in the paper, and it's very beautifully brought to life in Amelia's book, and she can speak more to it. But it's just to always have in mind that the pluralism of what law can be. So I agree with you that law often reifies, but it's a very partial sense of law. Formal state law often reifies the existing status quo, but the sense of what law could be if we weren't tied to that definition of it. And obviously the one that has the force of enforcing it with that violence I mentioned before is the state one. But there's so much, I mean, Amelia's book constantly reminds us that part of law is not what pervades everyday life. And there are sort of more collectively constructed relational forms of what actually acts as law. But then you have to accept that as law, and often people sort of in the legal profession will resist that and say, well, that's fine, that's nice what you're talking about, but it's not law. But where does law come from? I mean, the relationship between that form of legality and what emerges as actual law is sort of, you know, what I think PISLAP has been tracing, or Peter's book, from what I can see from the, just looked at with the big social movements. That's where it came from. Those tiny incremental things that Amy spoke of. I feel like I've talked enough.
I just, if I could, that question is very evocative. And Duncan, I kind of wanted to ask you a question back. Does it work for people in your kind of practice as a psychotherapist? Because it really, to me, gets at the tension and some of the criticisms or concerns that other folks have sort of articulated when they think about what, you know, this prefigurative legality, right? So it really is asking people to take a break from feeling the weight of structural problems and impossibility, right? To pause and see cracks or other imaginings, to see legal forms making the world otherwise. But of course, there are still the weight of the, you know, of the lived experience of the structure. So I'd be curious to know how in a counseling moment that question works.
Well, this could obviously be a really long conversation, but just briefly, I would say yes. That is, so in a way, I look at this as kind of vectors, right? That there's a vector from the present moment out, but there's a vector from the imagined future back. So if I can shift things from the present moment where things feel stuck and just say, let's not try to engineer how to get unstuck, but let's imagine what the future would be and then engineer back from that. And it sounds like that's what it is that you're doing here, is like doing this reverse engineering thing, that is, imagine something that would be better and then see what we would do in the present in order to get there. Mm-hmm. And I am really struck by that idea. It never occurred to me in law school that what I might be able to do is imagine a possible future. It was always that I was focusing on what it is that the clients are bringing to me. What does the law say now, right? Precedent says we have to do this now. So it's always dealing with these exigencies of the present moment, which we then reify, right? We think they're real. So I loved what you said, for example, about people who are just imagining, well, actually Biden lost and that Trump won. that's the same kind of imagining that we can imagine all kinds of things, right? If we can imagine that, right? So I'm just really intrigued.
Thank you all. I'm going to call in Lyle now.
Thank you. And apologies for being late. I've been traveling and trying to catch snatches of this from the radio, from the phone. So I'll go back but I want to mention two things that I was struck by, and the sense of what you might call norms that are different from what the law says, as well as the opportunities that getting outside the law provides. And I'm doing some research on an article I did on called My Tree versus Your Solar Collector, which was about conflicting beneficial uses of land once. I found out that they, at least I think in some portions of the ranching country up in California, the norm was that you fenced your cows in rather so they wouldn't get out and get run over. In other words, the reverse of the presumption, and people sort of felt that their job was to sort of stay one ahead of reciprocity created. I was really struck by that because the conventional norm was different. And the other is an example from an old Volkswagen commercial that apparently there's a plaza in Sweden where there's a T station or a train station of some sort, and they wanted people to take the stairs rather than the escalator. So they turned the stairs into musical keys. So they would walk up the stairs and play a tune. And it's just a wholly non-legal solution. And I guess what I'm fascinated by their sense that the imagination is much greater than the boundaries of what we conventionally think the law should be or is. And I just hope they'll keep up this conversation. And if there are other thoughts along those lines, I'd love to hear them. I also mentioned that in addition to the teaching law, I'm a local elected official. So I'm listening to this with the trying to figure out what I do with our parking regulations, but that's a whole nother story. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lyle. Libby, do you have your hand up there?
I do.
Or okay, go ahead.
I'll take it down now. And I'm just full of ideas and responses. This is a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And I too will be reading the article right away in the book. And the idea of imaginal cells, of course, is present here. And how do we walk toward those? I've recently been in a course that Herman Green and the Earth Law Center presented, and there's a new book called Earth Law, which is meant as a textbook for law schools. And when they use the word law in that context, they're not talking about statutes or constitutions. They're talking about kind of like reality. Nature has some bottom lines that we can't cross and that sort of thing. It was fascinating for me to encounter the use of the word law in that sense, that it's out there and we need to conform to it. That's one point I wanted to bring in. The other is I read a book, Outposts of Change by Ben Weiner. The first half of the book is dreadful. It's all the problems we know about. And the second half, he's proposing that we link up with outposts who are basically imaginal cells in this context that we're talking about. And that the more we link together and in this creative process, the more the movement will build. And I love that idea and wanted to share it.
Didn't know if any of our presenters wanted to respond further. What Libby just expressed reminds me of a PISLAP talk we had a number of months ago by Mumta Ito, who had the group called Nature's Rights, and it's really about the rights of Mother Earth. And in a sense, that is a form of prefigurative legality as well, because it's I know that in some of the indigenous cultures in South America, there's also quite a bit of discussion of the rights of nature. So that's just another lens that came to my mind. I wanted to also ask the question of my colleague Anita Madali. She's a member of our executive committee and couldn't be here today. But her question is related to the use of the word ritual. So she felt that she had read Amy's piece and thought that the as if world had many resonances with the theory of ritual, because ritual also creates as if spaces, even if those moments are temporary. And she quoted from a book that's by well, doesn't have the name, that said ritual involves the endless work of building, refining, and rebuilding webs of relationships in an otherwise fragmented world. The work of ritual builds a world that for brief moments creates pockets of order, pockets of joy, pockets of inspiration. There is indeed autonomy in such a work, but it's an autonomy that recognizes the limited and fragmented world in which we act. So she's wondering, and Anita is wondering whether the work of ritual has been, have you thought about that in your research, and does it resonate with what you're each exploring? And she just added a postscript to that, which is along the lines that we've been talking about as well, which is that, of course, sometimes ritual can be dangerous because it's operating in a very fractured and broken world. And so we presume when we use the word transformation that it will be positive and life-giving, but of course it can have another side as well. So wondering what you all think about that ritual analogy.
Amy, do you want? I'm.
Go ahead. No.
So I love that. That's very generative. And although we haven't worked it into this paper, the first thing that came to mind was actually, of course, the dependence of formal law in our current setting on ritual, and the ritual of the courtroom and the ritual of the dress. And I know America doesn't use wigs and robes anymore, but we still do. And that's really such an extraordinary thing, the wigs and robes. And as my children grew up and sort of encountered law, that's what most fascinates them. And that whole idea, that's a ritual that's not, it's attached to this whole idea of law as objective and neutral and something outside of us, which goes both ways. And that's often what, is debated readily in law schools, but the more prefigurative possibilities, I also think of that connection to the Indigenous knowledges, which you just spoke of earlier, Nanette, because I'm involved in some other things here in Sydney around regenerative economy creation, and we work with First Nations people. And we just had a meeting. One of our people who was meant to open a session we ran this week was sick, and we met with him to find out what he would have said. And he was going to speak entirely about ritual and the importance of ritual, about connecting nature and human in a way that builds a bridge across the sacral and the profane. Sacred and profane was actually the words that he used. Now, we've not used that language in this setting of regenerative economy activism at all before, but we have used the spirit. But it was interesting to me that he used the actual words. And the only thing I think about this, I think it resonates entirely with the spirit of prefiguration, but the exact way it works is it's less about imagining a future and more about immersing yourself into something that's always been there, and that if you ignore it, then damage. So the laws that are demanded by understanding the natural world are not imagined futures. They're actual. They are. I don't know. It's more of a natural law perspective almost, but not one like the tradition that we were brought up with in law school. And it also has a very different conception of time underneath it. So, and I think ritual probably transcends everyday time. So it's a really, really generative connection. Thank you.
Thank you, Bronwen. Thanks for those reflections. And just to follow up on one piece that you were mentioning about the ritual in the courtroom, and I think, there are, efforts among practitioners to disrupt some of the kind of existing ritual and create the courtroom we would like to see, the kind of justice we would like to see. So it reminds me, back some time ago, we had a PISLAP conference presentation by a young attorney who was representing homeowners who were low-income homeowners who were at risk of losing their homes to foreclosure. And because that decision really was not just impacting that one individual, but impacting the whole community, she brought the whole community, as a lawyer, she brought the whole community to the courtroom, and they spoke out in the courtroom to protest the foreclosure during the courtroom procedure. And this was part of her regular approach to addressing foreclosure defense. And I think, you know, in some sense, it is prefigurative, I think, because it's creating the reality that, in fact, I think we all would say exists, which or making visible what we think exists, that it's not just a property matter between owner and bank, that it is a matter that impacts everyone around that around that home. And so in that sense, it's creating the courtroom that we want to see. And similarly, in the content of the law, that can be prefigurative as well. I think where we can advocate for different substantive law changes that actually embody the society that we wish to create, that embodies love in the way that Kim Vanderheiden was saying in the chat. So anyway, those are a few thoughts from myself as well. Well, everyone, I know we've gone a bit over. Let me just see what's in the chat and if anyone else wanted to speak. Thank you, Bronwen, for that. Did anyone else have a comment they wanted to make? All right. Well, I want to really thank. Oh, Kim, was that you? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It took me a minute to get to there.
Yeah, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, you know, as you're talking about all of this, all of the prefigurative kind of examples, and it's getting me so excited. And also, I just want to push to work more with artists, for lawyers to work more with artists, because this is my world. This is my territory, this imagining what can be. And, you know, and then I don't always have the pieces beyond the imagining, right? It's, you know, part of the reason I come to PISLAP meetings sometimes is to hear the people who are doing the other work. And, but I think there is so much that can be developed from, you know, combining law with the arts, and I'm sure combining other things with the arts too, but especially with this, prefigurative concepts. I think it's really exciting and fertile, and that working together with artists can make it more so.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful the way it ends. So thanks, much appreciation to Amy, to Bronwen, to Amelia for sharing your work with us, your insights, and for being with us from across the world at such an early hour. We so appreciate you all, and look forward to more. And I will certainly send out the recording. If I can include a link to the book as well. Also, just wanted to mention to everyone before you go that our next talk is coming up on December 12th, and it will be by Myrna McCollum, who is a Indigenous woman lawyer from British Columbia, who has done a lot of important work around trauma and healing from trauma. And I think will be a wonderful addition to our dialogue. And so great to be with everyone, and thanks again to.
Just want to mention that people don't know that the chat rooms can be saved by saving the lower right-hand corner. You can punch and you can print your entire chat room, and this is very valuable. Thank you. Love you all. Bye-bye.
Nanette, I just want to mention, this is Lyle. I don't know if I can mention one last thing.
Sure,
Jan Stanley's a colleague of mine from the Positive Psych program at Penn, who's working on a book on ritual that if we stay in touch, I'll try and find out about it. And then finally, in terms of art, I have a little fatherly pride. My daughter has an app called Fourth Wall, which is free, which gets you into virtual reality public art. So anybody's interested in that, go look up Fourth Wall, Nancy Baker Cahill, a small commercial message from a father. It's free. Thanks.
Thank you.
And then
Thank
can I
you.
just say one last thing? I put it in the
Of
chat,
course,
but I
Bonnie.
really,
Yes,
I
go
know
ahead.
this was meant to honor Peter, and I just felt like his presence was here so much because of the communications that he had with Amy, and that this was so much of what he wanted to see as his vision. So I was very struck by that. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Very, very true. All right, friends, be well and see you the next time. Good talk.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Thank you
Nice
so
to
much.
meet you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you.
Bye.